The little house creaked like an old violin under the weight of evening. Its wooden beams, darkened by decades of smoke from the small clay hearth, carried the perfume of yesterday's soup and last winter's firewood. Outside, the horizon was soft with the dimming sun, its amber glow filtering through the narrow window and spilling in fractured beams across the clay floor. Dust motes floated lazily in the golden light, as though time itself had slowed to listen. At the low table near the hearth sat the grandmother. Her body was small, fragile, almost folded into itself, like parchment worn thin by touch. The lines on her face ran deep, like rivers etched by years of sorrow and endurance. Her eyes, though heavy with tiredness, carried a soft gleam, the strange light of someone who has seen both storms and sunrises, and has lived to tell of both. Her hands, resting on her lap, were knotted with veins, calloused and wrinkled, but they held a strange grace, the grace of hands that had carried children, lifted burdens, kneaded bread, and buried the dead. Opposite her sat her grandson, no more than 9 years old. His legs dangled from the stool, not quite reaching the ground. He was a quiet boy, with wide dark eyes that mirrored the firelight, and lips slightly parted, as though the whole world were pouring into him with each breath. In his hand he held a smooth wooden toy, a horse carved long ago, worn by generations of little fingers. But tonight he did not play with it. Tonight he only looked at her. The silence between them was not empty. It hummed with memory, with the soft crackle of the fire, with the faint rustle of night insects beginning their chorus outside. Finally, the child spoke. "Grandma," he whispered. "Why do your hands look like that?" The old woman lifted her palms, studied them as though they belonged to someone else. She smiled faintly, a smile chid with sorrow. "Because these hands have worked a long life, my dear. They have carried heavy things, and they have let go of heavier things still." The boy tilted his head, not fully understanding. He reached across the table and placed his small, smooth hand into hers. His fingers disappeared into the folds of her skin. She closed her eyes for a moment, savoring the warmth. "You are still young," she said softly. "Your hands are soft like spring. Mine are winter now, but winter holds its own stories." "Tell me," the boy said eagerly. "Tell me a story." The grandmother's gaze drifted to the window. The last of the sun bled across the hills in a dusky red. She inhaled deeply, as if gathering the strength to open a box long sealed. When she exhaled, her voice came not as a tale, but as a memory rising unbidden. "It was a night much like this one," she began. "I was not older than you, perhaps even younger. Our house was smaller than this, if you can imagine that. The roof leaked when the rains came. The wind slipped through the cracks in the walls and made our lamps shiver. But we had bread, and we had each other." Her eyes seemed to glaze, no longer seeing the dim room but something far away, long ago. The child leaned closer, trying to follow. "I remember my mother's voice," she said. "It was the first thing I knew of love. She would sing to me as she patched our clothes by candlelight. Her voice was not beautiful in the way people think of beauty. It was tired, always tired, but it carried a warmth that made the whole room glow. I thought, if I could live forever inside her song, I would never be afraid. The boy's lips parted. "What happened to her?" he asked in a small voice. The grandmother's throat tightened, and she pressed her lips together. The silence stretched until the boy almost regretted the question. But then she placed her hand on his cheek, her touch trembling but tender. "She went away too soon," the grandmother whispered. "The world took her before I was ready. But she left her song in me, and I carried it all my life." Her eyes flickered with moisture, reflecting the firelight. The boy shifted uneasily, sensing both the weight of her sorrow and the strange beauty of it. He squeezed her hand tighter. "Do you still remember the song?" he asked. The old woman's smile returned, faint but real. She nodded. "Yes, I remember, but songs are sometimes too heavy to sing aloud. They live better in silence." The boy did not quite understand, but he nodded anyway. He laid his head against her arm, and she let him, her thin frame curling around him, as though protecting him from ghosts. The room grew darker as night deepened. The grandmother's voice continued, soft as the crackle of the fire. "I grew up quickly after she left," she said. "There was no choice. Childhood is a fragile thing, easily broken. Mine ended the goal I had to learn to carry water alone, to cook with hands too small for the pot, to keep a fire burning while the wind howled. I was afraid. Oh, how afraid I was. But fear can be a teacher if you let it." "Were you lonely?" the boy asked. Her eyes softened. "Yes. Lonely enough that sometimes I spoke to the wind, hoping it would answer me. But loneliness also teaches you to listen, to the earth, to the birds, to the silence of night. In loneliness, I began to hear the world's heartbeat." The boy shivered slightly, though not from cold. He was traveling somewhere with her words. To fields, long gone. To nights when she was a girl like him, sitting alone with the dark pressing in. He could almost see it, a tiny figure crouched by a dying fire, whispering to the wind. The grandmother fell quiet for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the fire. The boy thought she had finished, but then she spoke again, her voice lower, almost a confession. "There is more, much more," she said, "but stories carry weight, and weight can be heavy for small shoulders." "I'm not afraid," the boy said, quickly. His small fists clenched in determination. "I can carry it!" She looked at him, studied his earnest little face, and for the first time that evening she laughed. A soft, brittle laugh, but filled with affection. "Ah, you are braver than I was at your age." "Very well then, I will tell you, but you must promise me something." "What?" "Promise me you will remember. Stories are like seeds. If no one remembers them, they die. Promise me you will keep them alive." The boy nodded solemnly. "I promise." The grandmother cupped his face in her trembling hands, her wrinkled thumbs brushing his cheeks. "Then listen well, my love, because this is the story of how I became who I am, and how you came to be who you are." The fire had sunk lower, glowing embers breathing faintly in the clay hearth. Shadows lengthened across the walls, turning the little house into a cave of warmth and memory. The boy's head rested against his grandmother's arm, but his eyes were wide open, waiting, expectant. The old woman inhaled, the sound trembling in her chest. Then she spoke, and her voice seemed to pull the walls wider, as though the room itself bent to hold the story. "I was very small when my mother left me," she began. "Too small to understand death. At first, I thought she was sleeping, and I shook her, begged her to wake. When they carried her away, I ran after them until my legs gave out. No one explained. No one needed to. The silence was enough. Her lips trembled, but she did not stop. After that, it was just me and my little brother. He was barely walking then. His hands clung to me like roots, afraid I would vanish as well. I tried to be mother to him, though I was still a child myself. At night, when he cried for her, I held him tight and hummed the song she used to sing. It was broken, my voice too thin, but he quieted, and I told myself that was enough. The boy stirred against her, whispering. What was his name? Matteo, she said softly, her eyes glinting. Matteo with the round cheeks and the laugh that could fill the room. He was the joy that kept me alive, even when the world seemed too heavy. But joy does not fill an empty belly. She paused, and the air seemed to tighten. The boy pressed her hand. We were poor, poorer than poor. She continued. When the rains failed, our fields gave nothing. When the fields gave nothing, we ate weeds, roots, whatever the earth would surrender. I remember one winter night, the snow pressed against the house like a hungry beast, and we had no bread left. My brother whimpered in my arms, so thin I could feel every rib. I went outside, barefoot in the snow, to search for anything. Bark, grass, something to keep him quiet. My feet bled, but I found nothing. When I came back inside, I wrapped him in my arms and told him stories instead. Stories about food we did not have. Bread warm from the oven. Fruit, sweet as honey. He fell asleep, smiling. That was the first time I learnt stories can keep a soul alive, even when the body starves. The boy's eyes filled with tears. But you found food later, right? The grandmother nodded, though her gaze was far away. Yes. Somehow, always, something came. A neighbor's kindness, a stranger's hand, or sheer stubbornness. Hunger is a cruel master, but it teaches you the worth of even a crust of bread. To this day, when I eat, I taste that winter. I never waste a grain to ice, because I know what nothing tastes like. The fire popped, scattering sparks. Her voice dropped lower, like a confession whispered to the dark. One night, I dreamed of my mother. She stood at the edge of the bed, her face soft, her hands reaching. She did not speak, but her eyes told me I was not alone. I woke with tears soaking my pillow and my brother clinging to me. That was when I decided I would not let us die. Whatever the world asked of me, I would bear it, even if I had to carry the weight of both our lives on these small shoulders. The boy lifted his head, eyes shining. And you did, Grandma. You kept your promise. Her lips curved into a fragile smile. She kissed his hair. Yes. Somehow I did. But it was only the beginning, child. Life was waiting with more tests than I could have imagined. She leaned back, her gaze lost in the flames. Do you want to hear of the first time I left home? The day I learnt what it means to step into a world that does not care if you live or die. The boy hesitated, his little fingers tightening around hers. Then he nodded, whispering, "Yes, tell me everything." The grandmother's eyes glistened, twin pools of memory. She drew a breath, steadying herself. "Very well," she said. "I will tell you of the road. The long road I walked with nothing but hunger in my belly and hope in my heart." The fire dimmed and the little house seemed to dissolve. In its place rose a dirt road stretching to the horizon, a thin girl with tangled hair walking barefoot, a baby brother strapped to her back. The night outside thickened, but inside the story had only just begun to burn. The fire in the hearth flickered low, its light wrapping the room in a wavering orange glow. The boy's small hand was still clasped in his grandmother's, and though his eyelids drooped, he fought to keep them open. He did not want to miss a single word. The grandmother shifted in her chair, her bones creaking softly with the motion. For a long moment, she stared into the flames, as though weighing whether this memory was too heavy for such young ears. Then she began, her voice carrying the weight of footsteps across a long-forgotten road. "I was 11, she said slowly, "when I left home for the first time. Matteo was 4. The fields had failed us again, and there was nothing left in the house but silence and dust. Our neighbors had little more than we did. My father, a quiet, broken man by then, told me we had no choice. I was to take Matteo and go to the market in the next town. Maybe I could find work. Maybe someone would give us food." His eyes. I will never forget them. They were the eyes of a man who had already surrendered. She closed her eyes, and for a moment her face seemed to fold into shadow. "I tied Matteo to my back with a frayed cloth and set out before dawn. The road was long, dirt and stone beneath my bare feet, the morning air biting. I carried no food, no water, only him, only the promise I had made to myself that he would not starve. We walked until the sun climbed high and the ground scorched my soles. Still, I did not stop. The boy's eyes widened. "Weren't you scared?" The old woman nodded, terrified. "Every rustle in the grass, every stranger on the path. But fear is a strange thing, child. When you are afraid for yourself, it can paralyze you. But when you are afraid for someone you love, it makes you walk faster. It gives you strength you do not know you have." The fire snapped, casting sparks against the clay wall. Her voice softened, carrying the rhythm of remembered footsteps. When we reached the town, the streets overwhelmed me. So many people, shouting, bargaining, rushing past. I had never seen such noise before. My clothes were ragged, my hair tangled, my face dirty. I must have looked like a beggar child carrying her brother like a sack of grain. People passed me without seeing. Some looked, then quickly turned away. Her hands, resting in her lap, curled into fists. I remember standing before a bakery, the smell of bread, warm, rich, almost holy. It nearly broke me. Matteo whimpered in my ear, his stomach growling louder than his voice. I stepped closer, too close, until the baker shouted and waved me away like a stray dog. His words stung more than the hunger. Still, I lingered, until finally an old woman, not unlike myself now, pressed a small roll into my hands when the baker wasn't looking. "For the little one," she whispered. That roll was a miracle. We tore it apart on the steps and ate as though it were a feast. She smiled faintly, though her eyes glistened. That night, we slept under a cot, the smell of horses thick in the air. I held Matteo close, my arm aching from keeping him safe. And yet, despite the hunger, despite the cold, I felt something new. I felt strength. I had walked the road. I had endured. And I knew I could do it again. The boy swallowed hard. Did you go back home after that? The grandmother shook her head. No. Home had already left me. My father was gone soon after, vanished into the drink or into despair, I do not know. The house crumbled without him. From that day, the road became my home. I learned to work for scraps, to barter my hands for food, to protect my brother as best I could. We became wanderers, two children against the world. Her voice trembled, and she paused, as though steadying herself. But the world is not gentle to wanderers, child. It tests them. And the road always demands a price. The boy clutched her hand tighter. What price? The grandmother lowered her gaze, her lashes casting shadows on her cheeks. For a moment, she seemed to hesitate, weighing whether to shield him. But then she touched his hair, brushing it back tenderly. That, my love, she said softly, is another part of the story. A part I will tell you, if you are strong enough to hear. The boy nodded fiercely, though his chin trembled. The grandmother drew a long breath, her chest rising and falling like a tide. Then listen well. The road would take much from me, more than bread, more than home. It would test what it means to love and what it means to lose. The flames bent lower, shadows rising higher. Outside, the crickets sang into the night. Inside, the little boy leaned close to the woman who had survived it all, his hand swallowed in hers. The road stretched before them both, not in miles, but in memory. And it was only just beginning.